distant time, when myths filled minds and ruled the hearts of people, a terrifying tale spread through Greece about a demon named Aionis. It was said that he had once been a powerful god before his fellow gods turned against him, punishing him for his cruel deeds. Aionis was sentenced to be imprisoned forever in an abandoned temple atop Mount Olympus. They claimed this demon would drain the souls of anyone who entered his temple, and that he was thirsty for revenge against those who had stripped him of his glory and freedom. On a cold night, 5 young friends sat around a crackling fire on the outskirts of their small village, talking about adventures and challenges. As the flames flickered, the oldest among them, Andros, began recounting the tale of Aionis and how legend had it that anyone who entered his temple would gain supernatural powers and unimaginable wealth, but with one condition: they must survive his curse. The story felt like a hidden dare for anyone bold enough. Excitement sparked the friends' curiosity, and they dared to accept the challenge. They agreed to climb to the temple in search of adventure, or perhaps the legendary wealth that was said to be hidden within its depths. The following night, under the dim light of the moon, the friends set off toward the mountain, ascending in a silence mixed with muffled fear. As they climbed, the air grew colder and stiller, with darkness creeping into everything around them. Their footsteps echoed loudly, seeming to break the eerie silence, and as they neared the peak, they began to feel as though the mountain itself was watching them, observing them with unseen eyes that surrounded them. After hours of climbing, they reached the abandoned temple. Its entrance loomed large, covered in dust and crawling with vines, and the atmosphere inside was thick with ancient smells, as though time itself had stood still here for centuries. The walls were covered with strange carvings they couldn't understand, showing twisted faces and figures that embodied pain and fear. They moved slowly and cautiously through the temple. They heard a mysterious whisper, as if the walls themselves were speaking to them. The sound came from every direction, calling their names in a disturbing tone that heightened their tension. They entered a grand hall with a massive statue of a demon with twisted human features and hollow eyes that gazed down upon them. The statue's eyes were dark yet filled with malice, as if Aionis' spirit was still trapped there, waiting for someone to set it free. At that moment, a strange